Also, in this particular chapter, we wanted to look at, I think it was verse 39. So in verse 39, it talks about on the 15th day of the 7th month, you gather the crops in the land, celebrate the feast for the Lord 7 days, and with a rest on the first day and a rest on the eighth day.
There's that 8th day again.
Okay, so I thought it was just a 7-day feast. What happened? Where'd this 8th day come in? This is actually explained to us, but again, this is one of those concepts that you have to read all these books.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? So if I've only read Leviticus, I'm not going to get the full instruction. I need to read Exodus and Numbers. Oh, and by the way, we've actually found that this is actually wonderfully explained as far as where it came from in the Book of Jubilees.
Oh, yeah.
So, but even without the Book of Jubilees, I get in Exodus 23:16, the Feast of Ingathering is instructed. Well, then I get here, Leviticus 23, and it tells me at the same time, it didn't tell you what day to celebrate the Feast of Ingathering in Exodus 23, but here it's telling you to celebrate a holy convocation on the 8th day after Sukkot, which it doesn't tell me what it is. It doesn't call it the Feast of Ingathering, right? So how would I know what this is? How did I know Exodus 23:16 was speaking of an 8th day holy convocation after Shavuot? It didn't tell me what day, and this tells me a day, but not what the name of it is.
Right.
Then you get to Numbers 29, verses 35 through 38, and it gives you actually the sacrifices that were supposed to be done by the priests on that 8th day holy convocation after Sukkot. Still doesn't tell you what it is.
Right.
Right? So, thankfully, we got the Book of Jubilees, which actually tells us in chapter 32, I think it's verses 26 through 29, that this was something that, who was it, Jacob? It's Jacob. Yeah, Jacob celebrated this, and he was the one to originate this idea, this Feast of Ingathering, because it was at the end of the harvesting year, at the end of the crop cycle, and when they would harvest as an ingathering concept. And he celebrated it as an additional day because this was a day like he had angelic visitation that day. He got some great encouraging news that it was okay for him to go down to Egypt to see Joseph, whom he found out was alive. Right. So this is a wonderful thing. He was actually going to move down there at the end of his life, and God had already told him you're going to die down there, but then you'll be brought back up to here to be buried with Abraham in the same area with Abraham and Isaac. And so this was a big day of confirmation for him. He got an angelic visitation with this message. And he had just been celebrating the Feast of Booths for 7 days. And he was doing it with old grain because it was a famine in the land. So, like, he was doing this. Anyway, I just thought it was fascinating. And so this is where we find out in verse 42, this whole concept of the Feast of Booths that we read about in Leviticus 23:42, that was started with Abraham.
Right.
Isn't that amazing? And he actually celebrated it it was in Jubilee 16, verse 30 and 31. He celebrated with palm branches also.
Right.
You see what I'm saying? So like this, if you've ever wondered, where did these things come from? Did the Father just make up this idea, hey guys, I want you to build booths and sleep in them for a week. Just trust me. Like, no, like these guys, okay, remember, this is the same covenant of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Father, the same instructions. So we see in the Book of Jubilees, because these guys were so significant in how they trusted the Father and were faithful, we have some things adopted after their behavior. And Abraham apparently was so happy that he wanted to create a feast of joy, and he celebrated this Feast of Booths for 7 days, and he did it using palm branches. And the Father said, this is great. Let's make this a perpetual statute.
Yeah.
Which I think is wonderful, right? It's a beautiful idea. And there's all types of symbology towards the Messiah and the resurrection and the New Jerusalem that comes. It's just, we could do a whole show just on the Feast of Booths.
Right.
It's amazing. So I just think it's important for people to know the backstory. So while, Abraham, first person on earth to celebrate the Feast of Booths, even though the Jubilees tells us it was already being celebrated in heaven.
Right.
Same thing for, many of these feasts. So same thing for Feast of Weeks.
Right.
Celebrated since creation in heaven. And we're actually going to read about that in one of our pairings later. So it just excites me, guys. It excites me because I get to consider myself as a part of a covenant that has the same instructed behavior as Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob was doing. I mean, and they learned this stuff. Most of the law, not some of these specific feasts, but much of the law they learned from Shem and Noah, who learned it from their great forefathers. So I just think it's talk about passing on the traditions of God's instructions, like the book of Baruch talks about. That's just an amazing idea that we get to actually teach this, talk about this, and encourage people to look into this so they can adopt it for their walk with Yeshua, because it's an amazing part of your discipleship that, to me, can encourage you, not just because, like you said, it's not just a weekly Holy Convocation, but this is like, these are some vacation days, man, that you get to take out to spend with God.
I think of them as the field trips. Like when you're in school, you do plenty of book learning and all that, testing and things like that in class, but then you do all like the real fun learning out on the field trips. And that's what I've always seen his feast days as, is like, oh, this is like the field trip part of everything. Plus, guys, really, this just brings a level of intimacy with your relationship with the Father that I know I didn't experience before I was keeping them. When I was trying to keep, secular holidays and things like that, I didn't feel that closeness with him the way that I do keeping his holy days. So just something to think about.
It is. It's amazing.